Hello, everyone. My name is Jess Short, and thank you all for attending our webinar and taking time out of your day to spend with us. Historically, the content team hasn't done a lot of webinars, but as we are doing these quarterly now, and we would love to hear from you guys about what you would like to hear about. We had heard automation was popular, so we are talking about automation today. But if you have any aspects of content you would like to hear about, we would love to share. Today we're going to be very specific, and we're going to talk specifically about the knowledge bases, which are part of the delivery team in content operations. So we'll share a little bit about who makes up the KB teams, what we do on a day-to-day basis, and where we're looking at all the steps, big and small, that go from the data provider all the way up to that part where the content is released into the product. So we're in a unique position here in that we represent providers' data and delivery to all of you in a way that reflects your needs. So it's our goal to deliver this data as fast as possible and as accurate as possible. So we'll be discussing the process of automating that knowledge-based content, where we're at now in terms of automating, and the direction we are heading. We're going to give you a behind the scenes look at what no one else knows in the KB operations. We do have several members on the call here. Not everyone, we're spread all across the world, but we do have a number of experts here, and we'll introduce ourselves. And like I said, we'll go over how we manage KB content, how it was managed in the past. Briefly, we'll talk about that, how we built our automation tool, and what you can expect from our automated systems now. Okay, so we'll introduce you to some of our people on the call. Also, if you have questions at the end, Scott's not lying. We do love to answer questions. So if you have them at the end, we have lots of people here that can probably help you out. So like I said, my name is Jess Short. I am a manager here in the content operations delivery team for the knowledge base. I have been with the content operations team about 3.5 years now, and I have my library and information science degree from the University of South Carolina. Amy is also here with me. Amy, would you like to introduce yourself?
Hello, everyone. I'm Amy. I am a metadata analyst. I have been working here since 2006, right after graduating the University of Washington Information School with my MLIS.
We also have Yulia here. Yulia, would you like to introduce yourself?
Hello, I'm Yulia. I'm a metadata analyst, and I've been with the company for almost 3 years now, and I got my library information degree from University of Washington.
We also have Gabrielle on the phone.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Gabrielle. I'm also a metadata analyst. I work at Exlibris for almost 3 years now. And I come from a little bit of a different world. I studied industrial engineering, and I mastered in information systems.
Okay, so so that's just a few members of our team, and there's lots of us spread out like all over. So if you're ever wondering who it is who's working on your cases or working with data providers to get your title list updated, here's some of the skills, knowledge, and experience that the team brings to their work. We're a mix of different experiences and different skill sets. Many of us are, in fact, librarians, and we're also software analysts and engineers. We have actually worked in libraries, many of us, and some of us have been in the vendor industry for a long time. And some of us are catalogers. We also have a long-standing relationship with the data providers, which we'll talk a bit about. for this webinar, and we all, no matter what our background, feel very strongly about maintaining quality metadata for our customers. We'll go on and talk about a distinction. I just want to mention a note on the distinction between the knowledge base and discovery. So as I was saying before, the ecosystem of content operations is very vast, and there's multiple teams and tools and products, and we certainly depend on one another, and our work does affect one another. For this webinar, we are focusing specifically on the KB, the knowledge base, and the metadata that goes into an accurate and updated knowledge base. So while the KB works very closely with our discovery service, it is in fact a very different beast, an entirely different team and product, and they use different tools. So for example, with the knowledge base, we're very interested and concerned with what we call title level metadata. And by that we mean the title of the journal, the collection level metadata, as opposed to our discovery service, which is much more granular level of metadata. They're very interested in the article, chapter, and item-oriented metadata. So to give you a visual of how that ecosystem works and where we're focused specifically is right here with the knowledge base that feeds into the discoveries index, where the user that you are serving accesses their search results. We're specifically focused on knowledge base content. So I just wanted to be very clear about that. Okay, so to give you an idea of where we're coming from with our automation capabilities, we're going to take a moment and look back at the pre-automation days. This is how I picture it, by the way, tilling a field, because it feels like so much work went into it. And we're going to have Amy talk a little bit about what the process was like in when knowledge bases were very new.
So when I started back in 2006, there was a lot of manual work. And thinking about this, I was thinking, well, it's interesting kind of to historically look back at these things and kind of reminisce about the pain points of the past. But as I was putting together my remarks, I realized that a lot of what we talked about back then, and a lot of the questions that we've had, and a lot of the ways that we've gone about answering those questions and fixing things that were broken actually continue on to this day. And it's just things that we were thinking about back then is things that we are continually thinking about as far as automating and fixing data and just kind of the processes. So it's nice to look back on the past to kind of see where we've been and where we've come, but it's also been interesting to see that the ways of thinking that we had back then informed us to where we are now, and how we can just continue moving forward as we get more collections and more data in different formats. So in the past, we pretty much, I kind of say this tongue-in-cheek, but it's true, we accepted any old thing. And as long as it was digital, although many people tried to send us paper copies of title lists and things like that. So we did have sort of an emerging collection policy for what we would accept. Most of the things that we accepted came in Excel spreadsheet format, but there were also a lot of variously formatted text documents, things of that nature. And there was also, this kind of pains me to say, there was also visual comparison, which involved one monitor open to what was in our knowledge base, and then another monitor to see what was on a given provider's website. And so we just went back and forth, double checking the data, which, as you can imagine, took a lot of time. And it was, some of our very first automation tools actually were developed in order to address the visual comparison problem. You'd think that they would be used for spreadsheets and things like that, but at the time we were like, we have this down, we have our manual processes to do this, let's take care of the visual comparison databases. But then we kind of realized, wait a minute, this is strange. If we're doing that, why can't we just automate Excel spreadsheets and data that's already somehow tabular, somehow formatted and needs fixing? So our first forays into automation involved kind of this hodgepodge collection of different tools. For example, I had written some scripts to do some of the things that we used to do manually in Excel. Other people wrote other tools. We used Perl, we used Ruby, we used whatever language we could get our hands on and make something useful. And then we started working with, we kind of formalized the process to make a more formalized tool to do a lot more things as we started kind of consolidating this loose collection of tools. And at first we worked with an outside vendor, and now, as we'll talk a lot more about later on in this presentation, now we have in-house developers. So we work very closely with them to test our tools, to build our tools, to write functional requirements so that they could build tools for us. And there's a very close collaboration now, which is great, thinking about how we used to do it in the past. So I also want to mention that, as you can all imagine, speed of updates really lagged back then. And we sort of had this 2 weeks on, 2 weeks off cycle where for 2 weeks of the month we were doing updates, and we were doing a lot of these manual transformations of data, a lot of these tedious processes just to get the database, just to get the data into a shape that could be loaded into our system. And then once we did that, the other part of the month, when reports were running for you all, for all the institutions, that's when we could take a breather from the updates and do other important things, like answer your inquiries, answer all the cases that came in regarding the data. So it was a situation where at best we could do updates to the collection once a month. And thanks to automation, we've been able to actually do it, if possible, a couple of times a month. So that's been a great, that's given us a great increase in the speed of updates. So that's kind of the mundane side of the past, but I also do want to touch on this, I guess you could call it a philosophical side of the electronic resource supply chain. And this is language that I lifted out of it was a 2007 or 2008 white paper published by UKSG, the UK Serials Group, and it was called Link Resolvers and the Serial Supply Chain. And I sort of have since extrapolated it from serials to electronic resources supply chain. And it really addressed, if you can find it, it comes up very easily if you search for it in Google. It does a really good job at addressing the problems of delivering data from a publisher through the vendor, in through the library, and ultimately to the reader. And it gave us a lot of insight into where we could streamline our processes, where we could fix things. So the two things is, right, first was it lamented the sad state of affairs. But secondly, it gave us this really good idea, this electronic resources supply chain to think about. So if we can think about what's here labeled wheels of transformation. And I like to think of it as data kind of doing somersaults as it moves through all these processes from the publisher's world. We've learned from talking to them that they have many processes, the data goes through many transformations before at some point it makes it to us. We have our workflows, our processes, our data transformations onto the libraries, and we know that you all have your own processes and workflows before things can actually get to a reader. So the idea here is that all of us are kind of in the middle, and each of us kind of can address different parts of this whole long, complicated process. That's actually kind of magical if you think about it. And the end point of this is ultimately to connect the two most important endpoints of this process, namely the author of the information to the researcher, the user, the reader of the information. Everything else is in the middle, and how can we fix the things that are broken? How do we mitigate potential errors, which, as you can imagine, with a lot of this manual work, there was a lot of room for error. So as we've worked to develop our tools, we've sort of standardized a lot of things so that we have kind of standardized data correction and things like that to give us consistency and mitigate a lot of sources of error. Along those lines, we very seriously took some of the recommendations of this report, and we were very involved from the beginning with the KBART working group, and to this day we maintain a seat on that working group, and we're very high on KBART, and we try to encourage that as a standard, and to expand the standards to, you know, first from serials to monographs with KBART version 2, and now with version 3 that is being worked on to address things like video content and audio content and all the other content that all the students and the researchers want and quite frankly deserve and need. So I'm going to end this on the 3 C's, as I call it, which is sort of this, the more I think about it, the more our tools actually do this, and we kind of break down our automation processes. The first is basically to collect the data from the publishers, and that involves not only methods to fetch the data automatically, but also to have contact with the publishers, to have check-ins with them, and to try to smooth out any problems that we have in getting data from them. And then, of course, we correct the data because, as we all know, data, there's always something wrong with the data. Something always needs fixed. That's just the nature of metadata. So it always needs correction. So we build tools to correct that. And finally, throughout this whole step of data somersault, this whole chain of data somersaults, we connect the author to the reader.
Okay, and so that's part of the past, the journey of the past. Now, where are we going with speeding up that middle process? So the journey of automating our knowledge base. We'll share a little bit about that. So the first step in building a tool that would automatically go out and fetch data from these providers for content that had changed for them meant writing what's called an FSD, a functional specifications document. And this was actually written, for this tool, was written and edited mostly by librarians and analysts in-house in the operations team specifically. And to say that it ended up being quite long is an understatement, because we were taking into account all of the various scenarios. Like Amy mentioned, a lot of us had extensive experience working with all of the different types of messy data, and we knew all of the scenarios we would need to account for, all of the various types of content that we would need to handle. Basically, we didn't want to leave anything out. We didn't want to leave anything to chance. We work with over 7,000 providers, and like Amy mentioned, you know, these lay on the spectrum of KBART to non-KBART, everything in between. So we wanted to account for all of those little idiosyncrasies up front so that when they come in, our tool can handle anything. That's what we want. So yeah, we included all the different formats. We added functionality that would deal with possible diacritic issues, date issues, it was a lot of like problem thinking. Any problem we could think of, we tried to address it up front in this very extensive functional spec document to our developers to tell them, hey, we know we can anticipate this, let's get in front of it. So yeah, so when Amy mentioned this earlier about a collaborative, working group between librarians and developers, it's really true, because even though, you know, sometimes it may seem like we're two different species of people with the librarian type folks and the developers, we really were working hand in hand, and we continue to work hand in hand, and that's how this project has been from the start. You know, we wrote up our requirements, the developers, they build something, they hand it back to us, and we say yes, or we say no, or we say maybe with this. And they rely on us to ensure that the data that's going to come through is good quality. We are there for to be those gatekeepers, and we rely on them to help us make it as fast as possible. So it's really a win-win. It's a truly joint collaboration where, you know, we meet internally amongst ourselves to troubleshoot any issues. We're siphoning through the data. We're seeing trends individually as well as collectively, and then we prepare and present those either in bulk examples or singular examples. We do deal with a lot of, we'll see this once and we'll say we might see it again, and we'll explain to the developers what we need. So, you know, we've learned how to effectively work with a Kanban board, and now the developers know all about Mark, so it's like a win-win relationship. And throughout this whole process of automating, we have found ourselves keeping a constant eye on that, you know, magical intersection between speed and quality. Because from the beginning, we never wanted to sacrifice quality for speed if we could help it. And this is an area of work for us that constantly requires judgment calls. You know, as Amy mentioned, the data is always going to be messy. So depending on the quality of that data, how long is it going to take to make it perfect? What exactly are the problems with the data, and how important is immediate delivery over those problems? We are making these judgment calls all the time before releasing it into the knowledge base. And this is where we really rely on our expertise as metadata analysts, as librarians, and also the types of issues we have seen reported from our customers and what we know about and from the provider. All of these details help us make these judgment calls. And our goal is to have that data delivered immediately in the best quality possible. So Gabrielle is going to talk about the purpose and the components of the autoloader.
Thanks, Jess. Okay, so after Amy and Jess explained so nice how we used to work in the past and how the importance of updating our collections, let me take you a little bit deeper, and I will try to explain how the tool works, what is the workflow of the tool, and what are the challenges we have along the way. So the main purpose of the tool is basically to keep the knowledge base up to date, and also to be scalable, meaning the amount of electronic collections out there is increasing enormously in the past few years. So we also want the tool to be scalable and keep up with all the new updates we will have in the next few years. The method that the tool works by is basically fetching the file. It could be from an FTP or from a static link. Then it will normalize this file to match our systems. I will elaborate in the next slide about the whole process. And he will load it to the KB, and then it will release to the customers. Today, 80% of our collections are configured to the autoloader process, meaning almost all of our collections are automatically updates. The rest are either closed collections that will not get updated, and a long tail of small providers that we will update by request. Another important feature of this tool is the monitoring report. at the end, he will send us indications about what collections were updated, what failed, and so we can keep an eye and monitor this tool and always improve it to make it work better for the customers. Okay, so in today's workflow, when we're creating a new collection, it is mandatory that it will have the autoloader configurations, meaning we are contacting the provider and ask where and is going to deposit the update file. We have a lot of different options. We can deposit it in our FTP, or we can harvest it from the provider FTP, or it could provide us a static link for the file. We are really trying to give as much possibilities to make it work for all kinds of providers. But in today's workflow, we are not going to add new collections unless we know we can automatically update the collection. So let's dive a bit deeper and understand the process of the autoloader tool. So the first step is fetching the title list. As I said before, it's from an FTP or a static link. It's one of the biggest challenges I try to make you understand our challenges is that it's all based on code, and if something is slightly different, then it wouldn't work and it will fail the update. So we really work closely with the providers and try to explain that the file must have a consistent name and in a format, and all the columns in the file should be in the same order all the time, because if they will change even a small thing, it could fail the update. The next step, comparing to the previous run, basically helps us with runtime to the tool compare the size of the file from the last run, and also most of the providers send us files with date stamps, so it also compares the date stamp. And if the file has the same size and the same timestamp, then we assume that in this run there isn't any updates. So this helps our process to be faster, so we wouldn't try to move on to the next steps, and it will stop here and continue to the next collection. The next step, the prep process, is basically where the magic happened. So after fetching the file, we need to make sure it fits to our systems. So we get various types of files. It could be Excel files, Mark files, XML, text files, etc. And every vendor builds them differently. So we need to make sure that the fields are compatible to our system. So here we are going to do all the normalizations. Some of them really simple, I don't know, convert yes to Y, because the system knows to get Y. Some of them are more complicated, like embargo rules and all kinds of different stuff. The next stage will be loading. We are not loading directly to the production environment. We are loading to a staging environment. This is important because we don't want to load directly to the production, because the next step, the QA, will need to go through all what we ingested and make sure that all the data is applicable. So the QA step is a really important step. We have two different types of QAs. One of them is proactive. You know how to, it will fix, if you find all kinds of anomalies, it will fix them, like I don't know, double spacing, slashes, or all kinds of encoding issues. And some QAs will just give us an alert that they detected something and we need to check it manually. And the next step will be writing to the monitoring report. At the end, we will receive a report with all the collections that were updated, all the collections that were skipped, because compared to the previous run, he detected them as the same file as before. So we will skip them, and all the collections that the updating was failed. So we will need to go over them manually and fix them. And the last step is releasing to all the products. Then we will continue to the next collection and the next one, and so on and so forth.
Thank you, Gabrielle. Yes, so as Gabrielle mentioned, QA is a very important step for us. We want to ensure the quality that's released into the knowledge base meets our customer expectations. And as I mentioned, we took many precautions. We put a lot of thought in anticipating any possible scenarios where the data would be transformed and before it goes into our system and out to release. So we actually put in thresholds for the developers to build for us that would stop the data from automation from going straight through end to end and be held for manual review. So Gabrielle mentioned a couple of those scenarios. And a couple of other thresholds we have limits on are how large of a percentage of titles that have been removed since the previous run, because for us that is an indication that, hey, maybe we need to go in and check things out. So there's also a threshold limit on how much of our cataloging authority records are going to be affected, because we want to make sure that there's no damage to downstream effects like linking or discovery. We want to be able to check things out before that's affected, and before we can green light it. So we did build these thresholds in. At the very beginning, we kind of saw them as training wheels, I think, as we were building the tools, because we wanted more thresholds in place before we said, okay, this data looks good to go. It can be released to the wild. So we built the thresholds so that they could be adjusted, and as we worked on the upfront configurations and felt confident about the data coming through, that we could remove those thresholds and that data could go through end to end even more quickly because the thresholds weren't necessary anymore. So we are continuing on that path. Typically, you know, the librarians and us, we want to be overly cautious, and our developers want to be really fast. So we do end up balancing each other pretty nicely. So compared with the days that, you know, Amy was referencing, where you would compartmentalize your days and your months on what you would do, we're in a much different place now. We are in constant motion of cycling through updating content. At any given time, the content can be in a different process of the cycle. It can be new content that's being configured, or it can be content that's already been configured, but new titles are being added, or title lists that simply haven't changed. And so because we are focused less on scheduling and triggering those runs for manually updating the content, we're actually more able to configure and work with new content, which is really great and what we want. So compared to before, our output has increased significantly. Since we're able to constantly be updating, we've noticed that compared to before our automated tool, we're now updating twice. We're now having twice as many updates a month as possible. So before, where perhaps maybe we would, you know, miss an update 1 week or versus another, we're catching that because all of those updates are happening day to day throughout the month as the actual change is happening in real time. So we've seen a significant increase in how much we are updating our collections. And Gabrielle can speak to how much new content we have added as well.
Okay, so In terms of new content, since the automation, we tripled our capacity of ingesting new collections yearly. And I think this is a combination of three things. A close collaborations with the providers. Once they understand the importance of consisting files for giving us a consistent files for updating, and when we see that a lot of them embrace the KBART, which is really helps us to ingest content faster, and our close work with the, as mentioned before, with the development team, the fact that we have an in-house development team that really committed to the mutual cause to make the content faster and more accurate. So this really allows us to ingest more collections per year.
Thank you. So what are our automation focus areas now? Because we certainly aren't done. We are still very much in actively developing and improving. We always want to be better. We always want to be faster. So the team, like I said before, is still working hand in hand with developers, identifying new opportunities, new functionalities that will improve automation, improve quality. For example, we are working on, or the developers are working on for us after we requested to have multiple collections configured under one source, which will speed up the ingestion process for all of those collections and help us configure that much more quickly on the front end. We're also having our tool develop the functionality to ingest an Excel spreadsheet file that has multiple tabs and consolidate all of them together, which will speed things up exponentially. So it's really exciting finding, new ways to make things better and make things faster. And we're certainly, continuing on that path. And so in addition to what we do in-house with our developers and with our tools and making them better every day, we also are leveraging the relationships that we have with our providers, because as Amy mentioned before, the more we can do to standardize, to help streamline and overlap with their own wheels of transformation, as Amy said earlier, the better off it's going to be as it comes into our systems and then into our librarian systems as well. So we are constantly identifying trends in the data and working with the providers there. For example, Amy is actually in a close relationship with Wiley, the Wiley provider, the provider Wiley, and she can speak a little bit more to that relationship.
So yeah, a number of us have, I think all of us on the team, actually, we have sometimes monthly, sometimes whatever schedule we all deem is necessary, but we have periodic check-ins with our providers, and that's definitely for our highest priority providers. So Wiley, Yulia, Taylor and Francis?
Taylor and Francis, Oxford.
Yeah, Taylor Francis, Oxford. Britt, who is on the line, I'm informed, with Sage, with Gale. So all of these big name providers, we try to maintain good working relationships, and we have actually a provider relations team as part of the content group that we also work closely with. So there's beyond just working with the data, we actually also work with the people who give us the data.
Mm-hmm. Yes, so we're always looking for opportunities, whether it's in-house or with these relationships, to make the process faster. We do have a slide with especially Gabrielle and my email if you want to ask us anything, or if you have ideas about what else you would like to hear about, we're happy to discuss it. So thank you again, everyone, and we will hopefully talk to you again.